Fado derived from that mournful and that sorrowfulness of departing and longing for someone. And she's waving goodbye to her parents, not knowing where she's going because she had never left the island, not knowing when she'll ever return, and if she does come back, will all her family still be there? One of my good friends that I sing with, Angela Brito, both her and I, aside from Carlos do Carmo, we both had our albums considered for a Grammy nomination as well.
Às vezes a pensar me ponho que a vida é lindo sonho e chego à conclusão exata que na alegria ou na dor nasci para ser sonhador. O despertar é que me mata, que na alegria ou na dor nasci para ser sonhador. O despertar é que me mata. Por vezes no palco da vida uma tristeza bem sentida no meu peito se vem cravar.
Well, hello everyone. Hola. Thank you for joining me on another Tea Time with Tammie as we continue to explore Portugal. Well, one of the things when you're in Portugal, you might hear their distinct music. It's known as Fado music. And it started in the early 1800s in the ports of Lisbon. And it's one of those, if you have the opportunity to listen, it's one of those enchanting, very memorable Portuguese experiences. And today, I am so honored. I reached out to David Silveira Garcia, and he is a Fadista, which is a Fado musician. And I have the privilege of speaking with him today about his journey as a Fado musician, as a musician, and even talking a little bit about his Portuguese roots. David, hello. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello, Tammie. Thank you for having me. The pleasure is all mine. So glad to be here.
I love it. I love it. Well, let's start where you were born in San Jose. That's actually where you're calling from, in San Francisco, or?
Yes, San Francisco Bay Area. So it's a little bit south of San Francisco, yes.
Nice. And I was reading all about you on your website. And your parents, Rosa Maria and Antonio, they're actually from, is it Azores? Is that how I pronounce it?
Yes, Azores. It's a group of 9 islands right off the shore of Portugal in the middle of the Atlantic. And so it's their own autonomous region, but they're also part of Portugal. So they immigrated here in the early 70s. And then shortly thereafter, I came into the world.
Love it. So how did your upbringing contribute to you becoming a musician?
Well, music comes from a long lines of generation in our family, on both sides of the family. My dad played 17 years in the marching band, the local Portuguese marching band here in California, as well as in the Azores, as well as several of his brothers. He had 2 brothers and an uncle who were very big mandolin players. And so that's how I started learning was mandolin at a very early age, and then involved myself in a lot of community activities, folklore groups, carnival dance groups. And so at home, even though I was being raised here in California, we were raised in a very Portuguese traditional household. Also the fact that I'm an only child, my Portuguese at home till today, we speak Portuguese. That's what we speak. And so it was very traditional upbringing. And Fado was always something we'd hear at home constantly. And, you know, from time to time, I'd be singing it in the shower or singing it out in my room, you know, dreaming one day that oh, I'll be on a stage singing, but it never thought it would go beyond a dream. And it's been a reality these last 10 years or so, 10, 11 years. So it's been amazing.
I love that. And you just said something right there that touches home for me, that it's our imagination that creates these future experiences for ourselves. So even as a child, you pretending to sing and become a musician, look at where you are now. So we really embrace and celebrate these thoughts and dreams that we have, because we can't
Oh yeah,
them. Mm-hmm.
that's where they start.
Exactly. Oh, I love it. And let's talk about the perception of Fado music. There is actually well, I think it's a misconception, but we'll just put it out there that Fado music is very sad and mournful. And there is theater production by Elaine Alvila. And it says Fado, the saddest music in the world. Now, what do you feel as a Fadista? How do you feel about that misconception that Fado music is just sad and mournful?
You know, that's essentially how Fado was brought about. Fado, like you had mentioned, came about in about the early 1800s, and it came through sailors, fishermen, maritime men, and you know, normal working class community in difficult times. And so, if you actually look at the picture behind me, this is a very famous painting called O Marinheiro, which is essentially the sailors, painted by Constantine Fernandes, and it depicts the exact example of how Fado originated. You'd have these fishermen setting out to sea for days, months, sometimes years. And so the fishermen, as you can see right here, would take the Portuguese guitar with them and just sing those sad songs because they're missing their relatives that they left behind on the dock.
I see.
And so they'd spend their nights on the ship singing these songs, missing their family, missing their country, their villages, and living in that hope of one day returning. And then you'd have the family that was left behind doing the exact same thing. You know, you'd have the women in their shawls crying, waving away for their husbands, and with that uncertainty, you know, is he going to come back or not? And many times they wouldn't, either because, you know, they died at sea or just discovered new lands and just didn't have the capability of coming back. So Fado derived from that mournful and that sorrowfulness of departing and longing for someone, which is the one word in Portuguese is saudade, which is that word for longing. There's not even a literal translation to it in English because it's so powerful. The closest word would be like nostalgia, but even nostalgia doesn't have that emphasis that the word saudade means. It's just deep within that longing for something, for someone. And essentially that's what Fado came from. So it's not uncommon for people to relate it as being so mournful and so sad, so sad. But throughout the years, it obviously developed and has now flourished into so many different styles of music and interpretation. But essentially, Fado is an expression of emotions, as is all music. So with that, it can be sad, it can be happy, it can be frustrated, it can be telling a joke even. I mean, it's just essentially an expression of emotions.
David, you educated me right now. You just told me what I did not understand through reading. You know, I research before I have these interviews, and that imagery that you just left me there of those fishermen on the docks saying goodbye. Now I feel what that means.
Oh yeah.
Right. So now I understand. Yes, it's meant to be mournful, well, at least in the beginning.
Well,
That's
even
beautiful.
with the Portuguese culture, a lot of people immigrated out of Portugal. Portugal went through some difficult times, and so my parents being a perfect example. So imagine yourself on a ship, and this is really how it happened with my parents. You're at the dock, and you're immigrating. You're 18 years old. That's how old my mother was. And she's on the dock, she's saying goodbye to her parents, and she's getting onto the ship to go to another island where the airport was. And she's waving goodbye to her parents, not knowing where she's going, because she had never left the island, not knowing when she'll ever return. And if she does come back, will all her family still be there? So that sentiment is essentially translated into song. And so, yeah, that's essentially what Fado is. And it's funny because Amália Rodrigues, which is known as the Queen of Fado,
yes,
she said it one time very well. O Fado não se explica, o Fado sente-se, which essentially is, you can't explain Fado. You just, it's a feeling. You just feel it. So that's a good...
and with that, I can feel the goosebumps on
all
me.
The goosebumps.
Okay, and no, you would be considered, or do you consider yourself a new generation Fadista? Do you think that you have, how have you reimagined where Fado could go and what it can be?
So it's interesting you say that, because I'm a new generation Fadista in the sense of I'm a younger Fadista, not necessarily having been born in Portugal or in Lisbon, but raised into the music. But oddly enough, I tend to gravitate to the more traditional style of Fado,
right,
where nowadays you tend to have a more modernized version of Fado. I usually like to call it jazzified Fado.
Yes.
So Fado in its sense is very intimate. This was sung, after the sailors, developed it, it slowly went into taverns in the streets of Lisbon. And these are taverns that would hold 10, 12, 15 people. Everyday casual clothing, you're there drinking, smoking, having a good time. And so it was very intimate. You'd be singing and people would be like sitting right there in front of you. So there was a simplicity around Fado. Fado in the 50s, 60s, and 70s developed into an international theater performance almost. Amália Rodrigues was the one who took it worldwide. And so it started to develop later on in about the 80s or 90s into a full production, because now you're not only performing for 20 people, you're performing for 1,000, 10,000 people. And so a lot of people have been introducing newer elements into it to make it a full-on production or a full-on show, which is totally understandable and expected when you're going into a theater. But for me, it loses a little bit of that essence and that intimacy that Fado originated with. So I tend to keep it a little bit more traditional and simplistic.
Beautiful. And so that's how you describe your style, more traditional.
Traditionalist, and everyone who hears me tends to relate to that traditionalism, because I like to go into that deep into the barrel and grab fados that were sung, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, that people, some of them have forgotten about. And then that way I bring them back, and even at performances, they're like, oh my God, I haven't heard this in years. And then they associate that to my voice. And so it's a little bit of modern touch, but it's bringing back the old and rejuvenating it.
I love this. But you have done other really upbeat Fado music. And I'm gonna play a little short clip of yours. And it made me smile. This is why, I love talking with musicians and hearing their music in different styles, because I didn't understand one word, but I felt happy. It brought a smile to my face. I'd love to share that at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Já não há ginginha, já não há tindinha, não há taverna real. Já nos vão de escada e as tascas todas se transformam em snack bar. Já os restaurantes que havia de antes são hoje self-service, e até no café se come de pé, até que o Zé já disse que agora comer à mesa sentado, toalha guardanapo, bom cozinhado, e agora comer à mesa sentado. Quem for pesqueiro tem que ter dinheiro, parece que é bruxo. Já não há 300
Oh my word. Please, please do tell me a little bit of background of this song. It is delightful.
So the name of the song is Parece que é Bruxo. It's written by António Tavares Teles, music by Carlos Paião. And Parece que é Bruxo, oh gosh, how do I translate that? It's almost, I don't want to call it witchcraft, but it's Parece que é Bruxo. It's almost like you're guessing it, or, you know, it's just jinxing it almost in a good way. And then the Fado essentially says that everything nowadays, when we get together at a nice restaurant like that, even as casual as we can be, it tends to be a luxury nowadays because, you know, with the everyday hustle and bustle, you know, families aren't uniting anymore, or at least they are now because of the pandemic. But before, it was dinner, you know, at a fast food restaurant. You know, sometimes you didn't even have a napkin. You'd use your sleeve to clean your mouth. You were always in a hurry. And so now when you sit down at the dinner table, and it's actually cloth napkins and stemware and everything, it's, oh, this is fancy, this is luxury. When in actuality, years ago, that's what was done every day. There was no plastic cups and paper napkins. Everything was cloth and your china. So it's comparing how years ago things were, and today they're considered luxury now.
I see.
So it's a very fun Fado that we decided to do recorded live at a Portuguese restaurant in San Francisco called Uma Casa. A good friend of mine from high school opened up the restaurant. He's the head chef out there, Tammie. Mm-hmm. And so we've been working with them. And every quarter we do a Fado show, a live Fado show there at the restaurant, along with dinner. So.
Oh, it's delightful. Is that a traditional song though? Is that one of those kind of songs that everybody should know?
Because if you see, they sing along with it. And yes. So Rodrigo is the gentleman who really made this popular and sings it there. And everyone who knows Fado knows this one. And they just sing along, and it's a very upbeat, happy Fado. Brings a good atmosphere to the place.
I love it. It's lovely. Well, can you share with me, and you did mention that you've been singing for about 10 years now. Mm-hmm. Do you remember your first performance? Can you share a memory about that? Oh.
Very well. It was January 28th, 2011. Mm-hmm. I was so nervous, and it was in Mission, San Francisco, in Sonoma, in California, Northern California wine country. And I sang alongside Zalia Freitas, who's another local Fadista here in California. She hasn't been singing. She kind of retired a few years ago. She had some vocal issues. And so I was able to sing with her a couple of times, and that was the first night. And it was beautiful because it was in an old mission. Mm. I have to guess at least 200 or 300 years old. I may be exaggerating, but it was a very old mission. The inside was still cobblestone. We had the candles lit in the back, very dark and dim. And it just felt very authentically Portuguese. Because, you know, in Portugal, it's Europe, it's older. You have castles, you have old churches that are made with those cobblestones and old brick. And this was exactly the same way. And then the number one thing, too, that I loved was it was all acoustic. So there was no amplification, no microphones, nothing electric. It was just the guitars, the musicians, and our voices, al natural. And that was the first performance I did, and it was amazing. And I do remember being so nervous, and I was trying to walk around, but because of the nervousness and the mislaying of the cobblestone and everything was like, I was like, I'm not moving because I will trip and fall.
Oh my goodness. And did you ever go back to that particular location?
Funny enough, this was in January, and they did another show in December that same year, and I went back, and since then, they've done it, I think, 3 more times, and I've gone every single time. I was invited back every single time. Unfortunately, due to funding issues, because it is I think it's a county run a museum, and it was a county run event. Funding kind of, you know how that goes, kind of stopped. And so We haven't done it in a few years, but I think everyone's been asking about it. And this kind of standstill with COVID has brought a lot more saudade of all this. And I think sooner or later, they're going to do another event. And so we're going to work for that.
I love that. Perfect. Now, there's something I was reading about Fado music, and that nowadays you can, as you said, you can incorporate funny and sad. It can be happy. You can express all different types of emotion, or the song can be about a lot of things, but it should follow very traditional format. Is that true? To make it a true Fado? And can you just maybe explain what are those fundamentals that make Fado music what it is?
So for me, number one, a guitarra portuguesa, the Portuguese guitar, which is this instrument right here.
Right.
Fado without a guitarra is not Fado.
Okay.
You can play the same song on a piano, it's not Fado until the Portuguese guitar is present. That's number one. Number two is emotion. Knowing how to express the song. So like, you don't have to be Portuguese and understand the lyrics to be moved by them. I've done shows, and I've been at shows in Portugal even, where the singers are singing and the audience, none of them understands a lick of Portuguese, and they're crying, they're smiling, they're just hypnotized into that music. And if you can do that as a Fadista, then you're doing it right.
Right.
As far as musicality, there are two genres, essentially. You have your major, which is the more happier tones of Fado, and then your minor, your sad and darker tones. Then you have Fado tradicional, which is traditional Fado, which fits into several types of music, which is strictly a poem with maybe 5 or 6 verses, and it's structured to where you do the first one, you go to the second one, and you keep going, and that same name of music is adapted to several different poems. So like, if you were to go to Portugal and sing with different musicians, you would just go up to them and say, oh, play Fado Moraria in E flat. They will know exactly what song to play, and then you just put the lyrics that you have, that you know, to that Fado. So you have Fado Moraria, Fado Corrido, Fado Menor, Fado Santa Luzia. These are all styles of the traditional Fado that are, the cadence is usually verse by verse by verse, and the musicians already know what it is, and then you just sing the lyrics that you know to that style of Fado. The other style is Fado Canção, which is a Fado song, essentially. And that's where you actually have a verse and chorus. The second you add a chorus to it, and you're constantly coming back to that chorus, it's already more of a song and not so much your traditional Fado. That's why they call it Fado Canção, which is essentially Fado song. And so those are the two differences of Fado. And then you have the actual style. You have Fado from Lisbon, which is the most traditional Fado, where you hear Amália Rodrigues sing it. You hear Marisa, who's one of the newest, I say newest, but she's been around for several years now, but she's right now the top female singer. That's the style of Fado that they sing. It's the most common. And then you have Fado from Coimbra, which is more, it's from the universities. This style of Fado was established from the University of Coimbra. And so it's more of a serenading, almost like the troubadours from years ago, from centuries ago. So it's got a more serenading style and more operetta sounding, totally different than Fado Lisboa. And so actually on my CD, the one I released a CD in 2018, that was my second one, I sang a Fado Coimbra on there. And that's where you can really, it's a night and day difference, both in the style of singing and how to play it. It's more sharp, and you kind of grab and pull at the strings rather than just slightly stroking them. So the musicality is night and day difference.
And David, where do you draw your inspiration from? You did mention traditional musicians, but when do you write your own music or lyrics or
Yes,
no?
yes. This last CD that I made, I wrote 3 songs. And so since the CD's been released, especially during COVID, Helder Carvalheira and I, Helder Carvalheira is my guitarist and also producer. We've been working on releasing videos and new songs every couple of months. And so we've already done one, which is on my YouTube page, called Negra Solidão, which is Dark Solitude. And it kind of speaks about the depression and feeling lonely, especially, and that was written by me during COVID. You know, everyone closes themselves at home. It was pretty sad times. And so that's what led me to write that song. And he created the music and we did a video and we released it. And we actually have 2 more that are ready to come out. We're actually going to start shooting a video for it next week. And so within a couple of weeks, you'll be seeing that come out. And that's the project that we're doing right now, in creating new music and sending it out into the digital world as a, I don't want to say a marketing technique, but more as a learning technique for people who aren't familiar with Fado, get more familiar with it. Because now everything's going digital. And so that's what we're trying to do, is just bring awareness to Fado.
I love that. And there's something I will do. I listened to some of David's music. He shared his webpage with me, and I'll make sure to put the link there so that you can see his YouTube channel. But there's some beautiful soulful music. And so at the end, I will do a dance to one of David's songs. So you'll see that at the end.
It'll be beautiful.
It'll be beautiful. I'll find something that's, make sure to bring the emotion, because that's one of the things that I've noticed in your music. I was happy, I was sad, and you bring that out to me. And that's one of the things I love about dance as well, is that I can feel, I don't know Portuguese, but I can feel those emotions and try and express it the best as I can. And I love that.
Oh, I can't wait to see it.
And now, what advice would you give to the new generation of Fadistas who wish to follow in your footsteps? What would you say to them?
I think Fado selection is very important. You know, when I started, I wanted to be sure that I was picking songs that people remember and then can associate my voice to the Fado they already knew. Because that's very important. If they know a song and then they hear you singing it, they can adapt and really connect the 2 together, rather than coming out for the first time with all new music. That connectivity might get lost because there's no longing and connection to that song that you remember as a child, maybe, and now it's being sung by someone new, and then you can make that connection. But with Fado in particular, it is difficult because some of these songs, especially some of these, some people who are starting off really young as teenagers, for example, and they're singing these very deep, dark, sad Fado, talking about depression and sorrowful mourning. And they're like, well, you're 15, you know, have you really gone through that much in life or not? Or maybe you have. So essentially what I'm trying to get at is make sure to pick music that you can relate to, music that you can understand fully, because if you don't understand it completely, it's very difficult to really transmit that emotion onto other people if you don't really know what you're talking about or singing about. I remember singing a Fado that spoke about Moraria. Moraria is a neighborhood in Lisbon. And I sang it. It was a beautiful Fado. I had never been to Moraria, so I had seen it online, but you know, I was singing it because it was a great Fado. And it wasn't until I had the opportunity to go to Lisbon and sing in Lisbon to finally have that light switch click. And I was like, oh, this is Moraria. Now I really know what I'm singing about. And then I could really, at that point, transmit that emotion because I lived it.
Right.
So yeah, it's essentially picking songs of significance to you as a singer and having that right feeling and emotion to translate that for everyone else to feel it as well.
Beautiful. I think that's in everything too, is find things that you're passionate about, and the audience who connects with you emotionally, energetically, will find you.
Oh, totally.
Right?
Very much so. I mean, I've had several shows, because that's actually what I prefer. I actually prefer performing for non-Portuguese people, because Portuguese people are raised with Fado. They've heard them all. They love it. But it's the non-Portuguese that they're like so drawn to it. And when I see them smiling at the right spots and shedding a tear at the right spots, I'm like, yes, I did it. That's how it's supposed to work, you know?
Well, you know it works because we don't understand the words. So if you are able to convey that emotion without us understanding, then you have effectively given us Fado.
Well, that's what makes music, and that's why music is a universal language. You don't necessarily have to understand the words. It's all about the feelings and how it makes you feel.
Truth. Art. Art in general. Yes. Oh, this has been lovely. David, I cannot believe how fast time has flown. We've actually come to the end of our show.
So sad.
I know. You know what? I just want to say how beautiful, this conversation has been, and how much I've enjoyed speaking with you. You have such heart, such passion, and I loved it. Do you have any final words for us?
I just want to take this opportunity again, Tammie, to thank you so much for thinking of me and extending the invite. It was a pleasure. I remember when you messaged me and said, about 15, 20 minutes. And I was like, I can get on talking for hours on this. So we're definitely going to go above time. But, any opportunity that I'm given to be able to share Fado is always so appreciated. And especially when it comes from the non-Portuguese community who appreciate it so much. And realize, Fado is out there and Fado does exist. And we actually have one Fadista a few years ago who won a Grammy for Fado, the first Fadista, Carlos do Carmo. So it's getting more and more known. And that's the goal that me, Helder, and other singers here in California in particular, that we're trying to expose it more into the non-Portuguese community to get more people aware of Fado. And one of my good friends that I sing with, Angela Brito, both her and I, aside from Carlos do Carmo, we both had our albums considered for a Grammy nomination as well. I was considered in 2018, and I think hers was in 2016 or 17, I believe. And so, to be able to say that and be recognized by the American Grammy Association, and it's so fulfilling. It makes what we do that much more fulfilling. And to get people like yourself and others who are also so passionate about it, there's no price on that.
Oh, I am honored. I am so honored to have this time with you, David. Thank you so much.
The honor's all mine.
Well, everyone, thank you so much. I will put the link to David's website as well as his YouTube channel. And it is so enriching. It's so beautiful. And I cannot explain. As David said, you cannot explain Fado. You have to just feel it. And his style of music is just beautiful. Well, have a great evening, everyone. Obrigada. And we will see you soon. Adios. Bye.